Good evening, everybody. How are you? Just making sure this mic works. If you believe in yourself enough and know what you want, you're gonna make it happen. Make it happen. And if you get down on your knees at night and pray to the Lord, He's gonna make it happen. He's gonna make it happen. Yeah, that's right. Well, when I was a little girl, I would sing and dance about my living room, watching and recreating the music videos of Janet Jackson, Madonna, and Mariah Carey. Music allowed me to escape a lot of things. I could pretend that my parents weren't fighting, and I could drown out the criticisms I'd heard from teachers because I spent too much time singing and daydreaming in school. Sometimes I performed for just me and that television set. Sometimes I had an audience of one, my grandmother. Bravo, Jaclyn! Bravo! She would say, and hey, I took it. All I ever wanted to do when I grew up was be on MTV. I'll never forget the time my mom asked me a really serious question about my future. Who I'd want to live with if she and my father got divorced. I thought about it long and hard. Grandma and Grandpa was my reply. Jaclyn Marie, that wasn't an option. She was clearly less than amused. But it's safe to say that even at 9 or 10 years old, I had a mind and an opinion of my own. And I definitely learned that from my grandmother. I was her first granddaughter, and we shared a bond that encompassed laughter and music and chocolate. And one time, on a road trip from Delaware to Virginia, we started our own singing tradition, a duet to send in the clowns. It's hard to think back to those memories sometimes because by the time I was in 6th grade, I was 5'6", 120 pounds, and my body was 3 times the size of my 90-pound classmates. And I just used to cry to my grandmother sometimes, like, the boys, they tell me I'm not skinny. They call me big old Jaclyn. Who wants to be skinny? She would quit back at me with this fist. We are not skinny people, Jaclyn, and we are fine just the way we are. And although I heard that, I started to experience a really dark depression at this time in my life. My parents fighting, that teasing started to take its toll on me. And while my parents dealt with their issues, I avoided my own. I mean, I was a kid, and I thought it was just normal to be angry at the world and to like sleep and see a therapist. I'll never forget the time I had to go see a white coat doctor. They asked me a series of questions, and within about 5 minutes, handed me a prescription for Prozac. But I'll have you know, I took that medication with my rebellious self, and I crumbled it up and I threw it. I didn't need antidepressants, that's right. I didn't need antidepressants because I was just an artistic soul, and I felt deeply. Although I did start to regret that self-diagnosis by the time I hit middle school. I'm sure that Hole and Courtney Love didn't help me either. I listened to a lot of that Doll Parts, and it was a far cry from Crisscross and SWV of my earlier days. But sometimes my grandmother would catch me staring at myself in the mirror. I would think to myself how I wanted to be anybody else but myself. I wanted to be skinnier, smarter, prettier. You are a very fine girl, Jaclyn, a very fine girl. You must be strong. We are not quitters. Obviously, that was my grandmother. And she was right about that. She and my grandfather had come to the United States. They couldn't speak any English. They had no money, and they never let that stop them. So I took my grandmother's advice, and I made singing and dancing my antidepressants. And that year, in school, I landed all of the solos, and I would perform and dance and sing my heart out. So much so that my mother let me take a trip to Florida on a plane all by myself. Yeah. My grandmother picked me up from the airport. She had her arms open wide and this huge smile on her face. And I just ran to her and she hugged me. And I remember the scent of her Chanel No. 5 perfume. And the car ride home was my favorite part because I was allowed to get a McDonald's Happy Meal. She would let me listen to whatever music I wanted, and she would sing along in her broken English. It was awesome. And one time, we actually heard Send in the Clowns. And we just looked at each other and smiled. The way the sun hit her face that day, I swore God sent me a guardian angel and my grandmother. And things would change for me in Florida, and I don't think it was just the sunshine. I mean, I actually started to experience consistent happiness. You make Grandma very proud, Jaclyn, very proud, she would tell me often. And every morning I would wake up to the sound of her voice calling me into the kitchen. Jaclyn, Jaclyn, Grandma has a surprise for you. There'd be this huge bowl of tomatoes and feta cheese. She and my grandfather would be sitting at the breakfast table, reading Dear Abby articles. And I would sit down with them and put on MTV. And I would tell my grandparents how I dreamed of living in LA someday, how I dreamed of being on MTV. And my grandmother would always say to me, isn't this something, Jaclyn? You can make it happen. This is America. And I actually started to believe her. Music and my grandparents saved my life, especially when my parents did finally decide to divorce. I was in 9th grade, I started skipping school, I started working, and my grades dropped. And I mean, no one believed I had a future. A 1.7 GPA will do that. And at the times that I had some really interesting roads to choose, and at the times I had a chance to follow the rebellious crowd, it was like I'd be possessed by the sound of my grandmother's voice. You can do it, Jaclyn. You can make it happen. You make Grandma proud. So I made the right decisions, mostly. That voice and those statements are why I am who I am today. A woman who has never let laughable SAT scores or depression define my success. And maybe that's just the irony in my story. Sometimes we think we've finally seen the light, only to realize we're not out of the dark now, or maybe ever. It was 2 years into my business as a social media consultant, marketing director, Jaclyn of all trades, you name it. And my inner critic was having a heyday with me. Music and singing were on the back burner, and I would always call upon my grandmother's voice to pull me through. And this one particular overcast day in March, I was on a career high. I had just gotten back from a really successful client event, and I had finally broken even. Woohoo! And then the phone rang. Hello? All I hear are the words, grandmother and dying. So I immediately dropped everything that I was doing, and I hopped on a plane. And I couldn't help but think back to all those times she picked me up at the airport as I flew cross country. As soon as I got to Florida, I went straight to her. She was at my aunt's house. I walked in, and I saw her. Her eyes were closed. The nurses were there, and they told me that although she couldn't talk, she could still hear me. sat down. I said to the nurse, "Can I have a moment?" I took my grandmother's right hand into my left, and it was still warm. "Grandma, Grandma, it's Jaclyn. I love you." I didn't know what else to do, so I just started singing "Send in the Clowns." Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Me here at last on the ground, you in midair. Send in the clowns. Just then, her eyebrows moved, and I held on to her tighter and tighter, and as tight as I could. I wasn't a 30-year-old woman anymore. I was her little girl, and I wasn't ready to let her go. As I realized that she would be dying, so many things came to my mind, and I started making promises. I promised her that I would continue to make something of myself. I promised her that I would look after my grandfather and I would tuck him in every night exactly as she had taught me. I promised her I would take care of my mother and my father. And I made her promise me that whether she was here or there, that she would always be with me. 2 days later, I held her hand one last time as she took her final breath. And 3.5 weeks later, I held my grandfather's hand as he took his. And I have to say, my grandparents didn't leave me empty-handed. Although I was so angry at God that 30 years worth of love and support was gone like that in 3.5 weeks, and in one breath, I realized I had got the best gift ever, and that was this. This is not our practice life. We may not get to say goodbye. We may not get to say that we're sorry. This is not our practice life, and we may not get to live to be 80. And we take our dreams and we lock them up and we throw away the key, hoping to dust it off sometime in the future. But this moment is our future. And as I share my story with you tonight, my only regret is not that my grandparents never got to see me on MTV before they died. It's that they didn't get to see me perform tonight. Who's knocking? We're just getting warmed up, y'all. If you know this song, feel free to sing along. This was one of my grandparents' favorite songs, so. You're gonna be a shining star in fancy clothes and fancy cars and limousines. You're gonna go far, 'cause everyone knows just who you are. So what? Hey, you're steady chasing the paper, just live your life. Hey, ain't got no time for no haters, just live your life. Hey, no telling where it'll take ya, just live your life. Hey, 'cause I'm a paper chaser. Not more than 3 short years ago, I was abandoned and alone, without a penny to my name, so very young and so afraid. No proper shoes upon my feet. Sometimes I couldn't even breathe. Sleep, but still I had to keep on going. Never knowing If I could take it, if I would make it through the night, I held on to my faith, I struggled and I prayed, and now I found my way. If you believe in yourself enough and know what you want, you're gonna make it happen. Make it happen. All right, help me out here. So Olivia. You steady chasing the paper, so Olivia. No telling where it'll take you, just live your. Y'all want it, right? Just live your life. 'Cause I'm a paper chaser, just living my life.